Filler, and I'm not talking the type that you find in a sandwich. It's a phenomenon that people use to describe when any sort of respective media utilizes something that is not overly relevant to the plot as a means of padding out the time, or also as a means basically just to cut away from the main plot. You will very rarely find a show that is immune to filler, and because of the fact that it is a show, Ninjago is susceptible to it. But the thing that's interesting is that Ninjago's filler has actually evolved quite interestingly over the course of its years. Over each and every single era, you can note that Ninjago filler almost does feel different, and that's actually quite fascinating when you think about it. But that interesting thought ultimately leads to the idea of how is it that Ninjago handles filler, and what era of the show handles it best, because I do think you can quantify it down to certain eras of the show, and honestly, it does lead to debate on which is better. I've actually spent a bit too much time in retrospect thinking about what type of filler I actually prefer. So, I'm going to present to you today how Ninjago handles filler, show it happening over the course of the years, and I would love to know, what is your opinion? What is the best way to handle filler within this show? Because as soon as I'm done, hopefully you're on the exact same boat as me, because that's just typically what I do on this channel. But let me not waste any more of your time, and let's talk about how Ninjago's filler has evolved. So let's bring our mind back to the original era of the show. The first 7 seasons actually had a very specific brand of filler that is actually quite unique. The thing is that when the show first began, the plot itself was actually quite full. It was quite tight for what it was. There was a lot going on in every Ninjago episode, to the point where there wasn't actually much to be considered as filler. It was mainly just considered as just general antics. Filler was designated specifically to a certain era, being the first half of season 2. Because these episodes served basically no plot relevance, they were designated as filler, something that nothing else really had in common, and that is going to be the main thing. In the original era, filler was entire episodes. It was entire episodes in a 22-minute length that was just designated to something that didn't overly matter. Darkness Shall Rise, Double Trouble, Child's Play, Ninja Ball Run, all of these episodes shared something in common, being the fact that it was just simply put Garmadon doing something to try and stop the ninja for it to ultimately fail. There was nothing that brought any of the plot forward, nothing that brought anything of the plot back. The only thing that really happened of significance during this time was the loss of the Mega Weapon in Wrong Place, Wrong Time, and also Lloyd growing up in Child's Play. So it's not exactly like those episodes are completely necessary to Ninjago as an overall, and there's a reason why a lot of people dislike them because of it. I will say, personally speaking, I actually really like the filler episodes, but that's just kind of me. But that's the point. Filler was something that took up entire runtimes. It was something that when Ninjago was releasing on a weekly basis, you had to deal with for at least a month. So we actually did get to see how filler was a mainstay in that specific era. But like I said, the thing is that it didn't really stick around because every other season just needed that runtime. Which I would like to add just as a complete side note, and something I've never really thought about until now. If you think about the fact that Ninjago is meant to end with season 2, we have 4 or 5 episodes of filler, depending on what you consider to be filler, that would have taken up a 26 episode overall runtime, meaning that filler would have been of nearly 20% of Ninjago. That is crazy to think about, but that's just me. But like I said, the thing is that people definitely did have mixed feelings about it, and to this very day that they still do. And I do think that is one interesting thing to look at, being that people just didn't really care for, and still don't really care for, entire episodes that are designated for plot specifically. Because I do think another thing that is worth noting, and something that does differ when it does come to this era, is that this filler was at least centered around the ninja, and was actually something that actually had something for the ninjas to truly do, which I do think is pretty good. It allows you to have that downtime with the ninja, it allows you to see them when they're not facing the bigger threat of Ninjago. But that's the thing, people just still didn't care for it. But the next era of filler that we actually got to see was a variation and potentially for the better or for the worst, considering how you think about it. Because this leads us on to the next era of filler, which is actually going to be the 11-minute era. Now the thing is about this era is that it's a long way away from the episodes we just talked about, but like I said, I've justified the first 7 seasons, and the only trilogy certainly didn't have any filler, so let's talk about these seasons. The thing is, and the main differ when it does come to this era, is for one, the episodes are much shorter, allowing for much more condensed stories and allowing a lot more to actually go on in terms of a broader narrative, because there's an easier way to break away from plot points because of the runtime. But the thing is that how the 11-minute era handled this was having full dedicated episodes like the filler episodes from season 2, but the difference mainly being that they actually went away from the ninja. Filler in this 11-minute era was mainly designated to side characters, was designated to Ninjago City as a whole. We got to see the likes of Little Nelson, for example. We got multiple filler episodes that showed him actually being a paperboy. It eventually does coincide with the main plot and crystallize, but the point is that we had tons of episodes that didn't even show the ninja. Showed maybe what the ninja were doing from a different perspective, but that was basically it. They aren't the only example of this. We did have filler episodes like The Absolute Worst, showing the villains of the ninja actually talking about the ninja. You have Kaiju Protocol, where Pixel went off and fought the Preeminent. We have the Dungeon Party episode, where we get to hear about how the Upley actually went and found the Skull Hazardor for the Skull Sorcerer. And like I said, all of the paper-esque episodes as well. So there's definitely not a lack of filler content when it does come to the 11-minute era. But the thing is that depending on how you look at it, it is good or bad, like I said. Because for one, it does vastly expand on Ninjago as a whole, showing Ninjago from the perspective that isn't the ninja, something that we very rarely actually get. So for that, you could say it's actually good for world building. But on the other hand, it does just completely disconnect you from main plots. Again, I'll use the season 11 examples. If you think about Kaiju Protocol, this is from the era where the ninja are in the Netherrealm, so we have to completely split away from that plot point to go back to Ninjago. Or The Absolute Worst, where we get to see again just complete disconnect from the plot in its entirety. It is extremely frustrating because we just get completely separated from what we actually want to see, and it is definitely a leading cause of frustration. I think it goes without saying that it's definitely a type of filler that if you didn't like it in the original era of the show, you definitely wouldn't like it now, because it takes you away from the characters that you are ultimately coming to the show for. The ninja are ultimately the main aspect of Ninjago, so take them out of the equation and give us episodes that aren't relevant to the plot at all, and you end up with something that people just ultimately don't like. So that is how filler evolved from the classic era, taken away from the ninja and given to more, which, like I said, depending on how you feel, could be good or bad. But that's the thing, it did involve one more time. Because Dragon's Rising has introduced a new way of having filler content within Ninjago. I will say, Dragon's Rising doesn't need filler because we already are very much strapped for time as is, but that's just me. But filler is most definitely within these seasons, and the main way they do it is not by giving it dedicated episodes anymore. The show actually went back to the 22-minute format, so it's definitely not a case of you could dedicate a whole 22 minutes to how Fuji Dove not ended the ninja. Bleh. But the thing is that we actually got a new way of doing it. Filler did mostly go back to the ninja, but the thing is that they were integrated into episodes where there was plot. So every single Dragon's Rising episode had something that was of value to the overall story, but it was just sliced in with scenes that just ultimately didn't matter at the exact same time. The best example of Dragon's Rising filler, in my opinion, definitely does come from Season 3, Part 1, where we get to see the likes of Lloyd looking for Aaron, and we get to see all of the new ninja also there, and Zane and Pixel. We then get it sliced in with scenes of Kai, Nia, and Wildfire playing a video game. Now, here's the thing, they frame it as something that is overall important to the plot, but the thing is that we know it isn't because we know where the person they're looking for actually is. We know that Jay is rogue. Of course, there could be a shroud of mystery, but due to just simply what we knew going into the season, people had a fantastic understanding of what was going on there. But the thing is, and the point is that we got these scenes where Kai's just sat there playing a game, hoping for Jay to turn up, and it was definitely a bit of whiplash when it does go to the overall story, because you were cut from that to Lloyd fighting the Forbidden Five. So the thing is that we have these moments where we just completely slow down and it's filler content, and it definitely is an interesting way of doing it. I will say that I do understand why they are doing it like this, because if you do have episodes that are just completely dedicated to nothing still, it would just feel like a waste of time in Dragon's Rising. So to continue the more low stakes, more slice of life-esque plots, you definitely do need to integrate it with other things just to simply have it actually be there. And I do think that is quite respectable, and honestly I don't really mind it. I like the fact that we get to see the ninja in low stakes in comparison to other ninja who are in high stakes. I do think that is just a fantastic way of showing how Dragon's Rising is a much larger world now, showing how there are multiple things going on whether they're important or not. But that does ask another begging question. With this being the current state of Ninjago filler, and again still being quite debatable in whether or not it should be included or not, like I said, because it is taking time away from things that should get more time, it does lead to a question of, is this the best way to have Ninjago filler? And honestly, I think yeah. I think in terms of the evolution of Ninjago filler, we actually are in the best era when it does come down to it. Having it actually be in episodes where there are still things that matter to the overall story is definitely a good way of having both your cake and also eating it as well. Cole would be happy. But the thing is that this is a good way of actually doing it. Say for example they continue with having full dedicated episodes for filler. Say again taking the season 3 example with Kai, Nier and Wildfire. If we had just an entire episode dedicated to them doing nothing but playing a video game, people would definitely not like it. People would not be a fan of it and would actually complain about it if it was the case. So instead integrate it into scenes where Lloyd is fighting against the Forbidden Five and Zane is with the Finders, for example. It is just a simple and efficient way of having all of your aspects of story being melded into one. It's a great way of just essentially having a much larger story. As much as people do not like filler and would like it to be about the main plot, the thing is that filler does need to happen at the end of the day. The ninjas' lives aren't just big battle, big villain, back to back to back to back to back. It is a series of life in general. And I do think the likes of the 11-minute era and the original era were really good at showing that. But I do think having it as full dedicated episodes just wasn't really overly the play. Again, take this idea of, imagine if these original eras actually had these instances integrated. Imagine having hints of the Stone Army in season 2 and actually having the Mega Weapon playing a part when it does come to the Overlords. I think that would be a great way to have these filler type content while still actually having it being plot relevant. There's no saving the absolute worst though, so you're just gonna have to take that and leave it. But I do think just regardless, it does show that Ninjago filler has evolved into something that I do think is the perfect meld. As much as, like I said, you may not personally like the story, it is the right way of integrating it. I think this is just the correct way to go about it if the writers want to have stories that just ultimately don't matter. There is nothing wrong with that, but having it in the show in the correct way does, and I think that is the best thing. I like the fact that filler has evolved into something that just simply works. The best way of going at it going forward is then actually reintroducing what we got from the 11-minute era. Having integrated into the Ninjago story side plot or filler that does have other characters would be perfect. It would expand Dragon's Rising even more. So I do hope that is going to be what happens, and I hope it continues to evolve in the right direction instead of the wrong direction. But again, ultimately, that's just my opinion, and I would love to know what yours is. Because on an overall, I think Ninjago filler has just become good. I think they actually are handling it quite well, especially in comparison to other shows that definitely aren't. But I would love to know what you think. What is your favourite phase of Ninjago filler? Do you prefer the full episodes dedicated to the ninja? Or do you prefer the 11-minute episodes dedicated to side characters? Or do you prefer this more integrated version that we do have now? Honestly, it's quite interesting because it does serve to show us how people like to consume the show. How do you like to enjoy Ninjago? Because I do think it is an interesting way to do it, but at the same time, definitely does come with the consequences, aka the season 2 filler episodes and the absolute worst. But thank you very much for watching the video, and I do hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. I love discussing Ninjago with more people, and if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you see on screen. Each of your support means the absolute world to me, and I truly cannot thank you enough. But like I said, that's about it for today, and take care. Okay, bye!